Rainbow Magic, Cherry the Cake Fairy, the Fairyland Palace, Forest of Greenwood, Clearing, Jack Frost's Ice Castle, the Village Hall, Twisty Lane, the Park, the Sweet Shop, Carolette's house, Dreamy Cooper's house, Christie's house, Witherbury Village. I just know this is going to be a wonderful birthday, Christy Tate exclaimed happily, her eyes shining. Mrs. Tate laughed across the breakfast table. You've only been awake for half an hour, Christy, she said. I know, Christy replied, but look at all these cards I've been sent. There's my party this afternoon. The best of all, Rachel's here for the whole week. She grinned at her best friend, Rachel Walker, who was sitting next to her. The two girls were spending a week of Easter holidays together. They had met on holiday the year before, and since then they had had all kinds of magical adventures together. First, they had helped all 7 of the Rainbow Fairies return to Fairyland. Then they'd helped the Weather Fairies stop wicked Jack Frost from causing weather chaos. The girls finished their breakfast and went to get dressed. Rachel was halfway up the stairs behind Christy when she noticed another envelope coming through the letterbox. She ran to get it. It was a very grand-looking, sparkly gold envelope, and it felt heavy in her hand. She glanced at the front curiously, and then gasped in surprise. Miss Christy Tate and Miss Rachel Walker, the beautiful loopy handwriting read. Rachel blinked. A card for Christy and for her? It wasn't her birthday for another 3 months. She raced up the stairs, 2 at a time, puzzling it over. She didn't recognize the handwriting, so it couldn't be her mom or dad. But who else knew that she was staying with Christy? Look! Cried Rachel, bursting into Christy's bedroom. Another card, and it's for both of us. Christy took the envelope and gently turned it over, running her fingers around the red wax seal on the back. You open it, she said, passing the letter back to Rachel. I've had all my other cards this morning. Rachel's fingers trembled with excitement as she carefully broke the wax seal. As soon as the envelope was open, glittering clouds of fairy dust billowed into the air, followed by a rainbow of color that soared across the room. Both girls stared, open-mouthed, riding on top of the rainbow, just as if he was surfing in a wave. On a wave was Bertram, the Fairyland Frog Footman. Rachel and Christy had met him before in their fairy adventures, but they hadn't expected to see him again in Christy's bedroom. Bertram hopped off the rainbow and onto Christy's chest of drawers and bowed deeply. He wore a red waistcoat and carried a gold bugler. Christy grabbed Rachel's hand excitedly and squeezed it. She couldn't help wondering if this would be the start of another magical quest. Bertram tooted on the bugler, then pulled a tiny scroll from one of his pockets. He unrolled it and cleared his throat. Ahem. Ahem. It is with great pleasure, he began, that I bring you good news. The fairy godmother hereby invites Christy Tate and Rachel Walker to the surprise party for the Fairy King and Queen's 1000th Jubilee. Wow, gasped Richard. Yes, please, Christy cried. From another of his pockets, Bertram pulled out a tiny bag of fairy dust and began sprinkling it over Christy's mirror. As the guards watched, the mirror reflection vanished, and a whole new scene appeared before their eyes. It's fairyland, Richard breathed, leaning closer for a better look. Correct, said Bertram. The fairy party workshop, to be precise. All the party fairies have been working very hard to make sure the king and queen's party is absolutely perfect. Christy and Richard gazed in delight at the small figures they could see bustling around the workshop. There's Cherry the cake fairy making a special party cake, Bertram told them, pointing a webbed green finger. The cake did indeed look wonderful. It was shaped like a fairy palace, and it sparkled with magic. That's Grace the glitter fairy making lots of magical decorations. And can you see the fairy wrapping up gifts for so prettily? She's Jasmine, the present fairy. The two girls watched in delight as Jasmine tied a pink satin bow around one of the presents. Who else is there? Christy asked eagerly. Bertram pointed. There's Polly, the party fun fairy. She is in charge of party games, and Melody, the music fairy, sorts out the best party tunes. She's teaching the fairy orchestra how to play the harmonies for Happy Jubilee. The girls were silent and listened to the sweet sounds of fairy music tinkling through the mirror. It's gorgeous, Rachel sighed. Bertram went on. Honey, the sweet fairy, is making sure there are enough treats to go around. And Vivi, the fashion fairy, she's the one with the extra sparkly rings. Look, is in charge of everybody's party outfits. Christy gazed in wonder at the beautiful dress Phoebe was working on. It was covered with hundreds of sequins and jewels that glittered in the light. It's lovely, breathed Christy, her eyes wide with excitement. And we're really invited to the party? Oh, yes, Bertram replied. The fairy godmother says that you and Rachel will be special guests. Special guests? Rachel echoed, looking thrilled at the thought. So when is the party? And how will we get there? Christy asked. Bertram murmured something at the mirror, and the fairyland scene dissolved into hundreds of twinkling stars before finally disappearing. The party's at the end of the week, and the fairy godmother will send a magic rainbow to collect you, he said. He handed the magic invitation to Rachel. To get to fairyland, all you have to do is step into the end of the rainbow, he explained. Like this. Christy and Rachel walked as Bertram placed one froggy foot, then another in the colorful rainbow that hovered in the air. And then whoosh, with a shower of golden fairy dust, he was gone. Hurrah! Exclaimed Christy. I knew this was going to be a brilliant birthday. Fun and games. Rachel and Christy got dressed, chatting excitedly. Special guests? The fairy godmother called us, Rachel said, proudly tying up her hair in a band. Imagine you and me, special guests on the fairy king and queen. It's amazing, Christy grinned, brushing her hair. I can't wait to go to fairyland again. Just then, there was a shout from downstairs. Come on, girls, Mrs. Tate called. There's lots to do before the party starts. Rachel and Christy looked at each other in amazement. How did Mrs. Tate know about the Fairyland party? Then Christy chuckled. She means my party, she said. Do you know, I'd almost forgotten all about it. The girls laughed and hurried downstairs in the kitchen. Downstairs in the kitchen, Mr. Tate was icing Christy's birthday cake. There, he said, putting 9 candles on top. It's all finished. That looks delicious, Dad, Christy said, hugging him. Come on, Rachel, let's see what Mom wants us to do. Mrs. Tate soon had the 2 girls making a party bath for all of Christy's guests. Then they blew up lots of pink and lilac balloons to hang from the ceiling. And finally, there was just time for the girls to put on their party dresses before the guests arrived. Musical statue first, Mrs. Tate announced to all the girls gathered in the lounge. When the music stops, so do you. The music started and everybody danced. Then Mr. Tate switched it off and everybody froze on the spot. Rachel was standing on one leg trying to keep as still as possible when she suddenly saw swirls of red and purple glitter floating through the doorway. She stared in surprise, wondering what it could be. Then she flicked her eyes to the side, wondering if Christy had spotted the glitter too. Christy's expression told Rachel that she had, but none of the other children seemed to have noticed anything unusual. The sparkling dust floated up to Rachel, drifting right under her nose. Achoo! 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 She sneezed. Now the dust was under Christy's nose, too. It was so ticklish, she just couldn't help rubbing her nose. Rachel and Christy, you 2 are out, Mrs. Tate said. Here comes the music again. As quickly as they had appeared, the swirls of red and purple glitter vanished. Rachel frowned at Christy. What was that? She hissed as they went to sit down. Christy grabbed her arm and steered her towards the door. I think it might have had something to do with her, she whispered, pointing through the doorway. Rachel followed Christy's finger, and a broad smile spread over her face. For there, hovering in mid-air and waving at the girls, was a tiny sparkling fairy. Stop, thief! You're one of the party fairies, Rachel exclaimed as they rushed over to speak to the fairy. We saw you in Bertram's picture. The fairy smiled. She had loving deep violet eyes and long dark curly hair with red ribbons. She wore a red skirt, a pink wrap around top, red party shoes, and stripy socks. From her wrist swung a sparkly red party bag. I certainly am, she replied with a little curtsy. I'm Cherry the Cake Fairy, and an anxious frown creased her forehead. I'm sorry if my fairy dust spoiled your game, she went on, but I really need your help. Of course, Christy said at once. Whatever has happened? Rachel asked. Christy smiled gratefully. Well, you see, as the cake fairy, whenever a party is in danger of being ruined by a spoiled cake, I get called away from Fairyland to fix it. And today I've been very busy. One of Jack Frost's goblins have been spoiling birthday cakes all over the country. He steals the cake candles and stomps in the icing. She bit her lip. And he's on his way to Christy's party right now. Richard's mouth fell open. "What a cheek!" she exclaimed. Christy glanced over to the kitchen door. "Why is the goblin spoiling all the cakes?" she asked. "And what can we do to stop him?" Cherry's eyes flashed. "Nobody knows what the goblin is up to," she told the girls. "But one thing's for sure. If Jack Frost's behind it, it's bound to be something bad." She shrugged. "All we can do is try to catch the goblin before he causes any more trouble." "What are we waiting for?" Rachel cried. "Let's stand guard over Christy's cake at once." The girls raced to the kitchen, with Cherry fluttering along behind. As soon as they opened the kitchen door, though, they knew that they were too late. All the candles have been poured out of Christy's cake, and there was goblin footprints on the icing. "Oh no!" cried Christy in dismay. "He's ruined it. He's taken all the candles too," Rachel added crossly. "And I'll take this as well," they heard somebody cackle. And before anyone could stop him, a grinning green goblin jumped out from behind one of the table legs, snatched Cherry's party bag out of her hands, and ran off, laughing nastily. "A tricky problem." "Hey!" Cherry cried. "Give that back!" Christy and Rachel stared in horror as the goblin ran away. He was his normal size, Rachel noted with relief. She remembered that the fairy king and queen had taken Jack Frost's magic away for 1 year after his mean mischief had nearly ruined Christmas. Clearly, his punishment meant that he hadn't been able to cast a spell to make the goblin supersized like he'd done once before. An enormous rucksack bumped off and down on the goblin's back. It was stuffed full of party candles. "We've got to get my party bag back," Cherry cried, flying after the thief. "Quick!" The goblin was just about to dodge out of the kitchen door when Christy's kitten, Purr, came bouncing into the room. As soon as Purr saw the goblin, she fluffed up her black tail and waited for alarm and hissed. The goblin's eye bulged in panic and he skidded to a halt. Then he climbed up to one of the kitchen cupboards and locked himself in. Cherry fluttered about anxiously. That party bag has got all my magic or fairy dust inside," she fretted. "I need that to help make parties perfect and to finish off the king and queen's jubilee cake." Rachel banged on the cupboard door. "Give that party bag back to Cherry this minute," she ordered the goblin. "No chance." The goblin shouted back sulkily. "It's mine now. And as soon as I get out of here, I'll be giving it to Jack Frost." "What does he want it for?" Christy asked curiously. The goblin gave a gloating chuckle. "For his party, of course," he replied. "The king and queen said he got to stay in his ice castle, but they didn't say he couldn't have a party. And a very grand one it's going to be, too." "Now that I've got the party bag of magic dust, the cake is going to be the most splendid cake you ever saw." There was another cackle of glee from the cupboard. "Just you wait. Once we've got our fairies' party bags, Jack Frost will use the magic dust instead of his own magic to make his party extra special." Cherry had turned quite pale. She beckoned the girls back over to the table, where they huddled together to hear her whisper. It's bad enough that he's got my party bag when I have finished the king and queen's cake, she said. But if the goblins are planning to steal all the magical party bags, then none of the party fairies will be able to finish their work in time for the Jubilee. She shook her head miserably. The surprise party will be ruined. A sticky solution. The girls thought hard to try and find a way of recovering Cherry's party bag, but they couldn't think of anything. The fairy godmother is much more powerful than a goblin, Cherry sighed. She'd soon sort all this out. If only I could get the goblin back to fairyland. But I can't magic him there while he's in the cupboard or while he's running away. I need him to keep fairly still so that I can wave my wand over him. Christy found her gaze drifting towards her ruined birthday cake. Poor Dad spent ages on the icing, she said sadly. Then she grinned suddenly as a thought struck her. That's it, she muttered. That's how we'll catch him out. How? Rachel asked blankly. We need to make more icing for this cake, Christy said loudly. She took out of a box of icing sugar and started mixing some icing in a bowl. Then she added quietly, Cherry, could you use some fairy magic to make this icing extra sticky? No problem, Cherry replied. She waved her wand over the bowl as a stream of sparkling purple and red fairy dust swirled around it. The white icing glittered for a split second, and strange red and purple sparks crackled above it. Then it turned a glassy white again. Christy gave one last stir and smiled. Super sticky, she whispered. Rachel was still frowning. I don't, she began. But Christy put a finger to her lips. It's a trap, she whispered into Rachel's ear. Quickly, she covered the cake with the new icing. We'd better get back to the party now that the cakes are right again. We'll just leave it here on the table, she said loudly. Rachel and Cherry followed Christy out of the room. Holding their breath, they waited outside the kitchen, peeping through the crack in the door to see if Christy's trap would work. Sure enough, after a moment, the cupboard door creaked open, and the goblin climbed down and skipped gleefully across the floor, grinning nastily. He climbed up onto the kitchen table and then made a massive leap straight into the top of the newly iced cake. There he goes, Christy whispered to Rachel, and any second now he'll realize. I'm stuck, the goblin howled suddenly. They've tricked me. Perfect timing, chuckled Cherry. The goblin was stuck fast, unable to move his feet in the super sticky icing. Rachel laughed out loud at his furious face. Brilliant idea, Christy, she cheered. Cherry flew over to the goblin, her eyes on her precious party bag, but he bared his teeth at her. Any closer, fairy, and I'll bite you, he warned. In that case, I'll have to take you back to fairyland, Cherry said calmly. And won't the fairy godmother be interested here to hear what you and Jack Frost have been plotting? The goblin scowled, but said no more. Serves you right for ruining my cake twice, Christy couldn't help adding. Don't worry about your cake, Christy, Cherry said. Once I've got my party bag back. Our magic, you're the most beautiful birthday cake you've ever seen. Now, I don't suppose you two would like to come to Fairyland with me, would you? Yes, please, Christy cried at once. But Rachel was glancing up at the kitchen clock. What about your party, Christy? She pointed out. Musical statue must be about to end soon. Christy twirled her wand around. Cherry twirled her wand around. Don't worry, she said. I'll work some magic so that it will seem as if you've only been gone for the party for a moment. Will that help? Oh, yes, cried both girls together. I was hoping you'd say that, Cherry smiled. Off we go. A magical mystery cake with a blur of bright colors and the delicious smell of freshly baked cake. Christy and Rachel found themselves whizzing through the air towards Fairyland. Hello, they heard a sweet voice calling as they landed with a bump. And which one of you is Christy and which one is Rachel? I've heard so much about you, my dears. Christy and Rachel blinked and looked around. They were back in Fairyland and were now fairy-sized themselves. And there, standing in front of them, was somebody who could only be the fairy godmother. She had long copper hair swept up in a ponytail, the kindest green eyes that Rachel and Christy had ever seen, and wings that shimmered every time they moved. Her long golden dress was covered in tiny glimmering jewels that twinkled all the colors of the rainbow. I'm Christy, Christy said, jumping up at once. And I'm Rachel, Rachel added, scrambling to her feet. Delighted to meet you at last, the fairy godmother replied, dropping a beautiful curtsy. Then her eyes narrowed at the sight of the goblin standing next to Cherry. I see that you've taken something that doesn't belong to you, she said sternly, pointing a finger at Cherry's party bag. Whiz! The party bag glowed with red and purple light and shot back out of the goblin's hands at once. It zoomed straight over to Cherry, clutched it with relief. Thank you, she cried. You're welcome, my dear, the fairy godmother said. Then she fixed her gaze on the goblin. As for you, I've got just the thing to teach you a lesson. She pointed a finger at him. You'll need that, she said, and that. Christy and Rachel couldn't help laughing as an enormous chef's hat suddenly appeared on the goblin's head, and a crisp white apron wrapped itself around his body. You can help in the party workshop for the rest of the week, icing all the cakes, the fairy godmother went on firmly. Let's hope that keeps you out of mischief. The goblin looked very sulky as Cherry bustled him away. You won't catch the other goblins so easily, he snarled. You'll get the rest of those party bags. Just you wait and see. Once he'd gone, the fairy godmother turned back to Christy and Rachel. I'm afraid you might be all right, she told them. I'm afraid he might be all right, she told them. Jack Frost's goblins can be very cunning. As you know, they'll try every trick they can think of to steal the other magical party bags. What can we do to help? Christy asked at once. The fairy godmother smiled and sighed. All you can do is look out for trouble at parties. She said the goblins are likely to try and spoil human parties because they know that the party fairies will rush to help. That will give them the chance they need to steal the fairies' party bags. We'll keep a lookout, Rachel promised. At that moment, Cherry returned. We'd better send you back to your party, she told the girls. And don't worry, I'm sure there won't be any more goblins to spoil your fun today. She carefully opened her party bag and reached inside. Then, just as the fairy godmother pointed her wand at the girls and called home, Cherry threw a handful of red and purple fairy dust over them. The world seemed to spin. There was a sweet, sugary smell in the air, and then the girls found themselves back in Christy's kitchen. "Jessica's the winner," they heard Mrs. Tate saying. "Come and get your prizes for being the best statue, Jessica." "It sounds like the game's only just finished," Christy said happily, just like Cherry promised. "Let's go and join the party again, Rachel." But Rachel was staring at the kitchen table in wonder. "Look, Christy," she gulped. "Look at that cake." Christy gasped in surprise. The red and purple fairy dust that Cherry had thrown over them was floating down on the cake that Mr. Tate had made. As the girls watched, they realized that the fairy dust was actually red and purple. Hundreds and thousands. And as they landed on the cake, something amazing happened. A delicious fragrance of vanilla and sugar floated around the room, and the original cake melted into thin air, while a new cake formed in its place. Christy and Rachel stared in wonder as their three tears appeared. One by one, beautifully covered with white, pink, and lilac icing. Each tire was decorated with tiny sugar fairies, twining sugar roses, and shiny silver birds. Christy broke the silence with a sudden laugh. "It's the party fairies," she cried, pointing at the sugar figures. "That's Cherry with a wooden spoon, see? And the glitter fairy. Didn't Bertram say her name was Grace? And the fairy with a present, that must be Jasmine." And suddenly they heard Mrs. Tate calling for them. "Christy, Rachel, where are you?" "Time to go," Rachel said. "Shall we take the cake in with us, just to be on the safe side?" "Good idea," said Christy. Then she grinned. "I can't wait to see everybody's faces." Very carefully, the girls lifted the magnificent cake. As they carried it into the living room together, the little silver birds tinkled merrily. "Wow!" cried Christy's friend Jessica. "I've never seen anything like it." Another girl, Molly, was licking lips. "It's almost too beautiful to eat," she said. "Although it smells so gorgeous, I'll give it a try." Mrs. Tate looked dazzled. "It's a work of art," she said to her husband in amazement. Mr. Tate was staring at the cake too, with a bewildered expression on his face. "Well, it's not so difficult when you know how," he said sheepishly. "I can't wait to see what you're going to do for my birthday next month," Mrs. Tate added. Mr. Tate looked rather alarmed at that, so Christy interrupted quickly. "Shall we cut the cake, Mom?" "Good idea," Mrs. Tate replied. She lit a candle, and everybody sang happy birthday. Then Christy carefully sliced into the lowest tire of the cake. As she did so, hundreds of magical butterflies fluttered out into the room, their colorful wings sparkling in the sunshine. "Ooh!" everybody exclaimed as the butterflies vanished into the air, just like magic. Christy and Rachel smiled at each other. They both knew that it was magic, fairy magic, the most wonderful magic in all the world. As they tucked into slices of the delicious birthday cake, they both thought of their new fairy mission with excitement. "I can't wait to meet other party fairies," Rachel whispered to Christy, "but I'm not looking forward to seeing any more goblins." "I know," Christy agreed. "I just hope we can stop them from spoiling the king and queen's jubilee party. Rachel patted her friend's arm comfortingly. "At least Cherry said there'd be no more trouble at your party," she pointed out, "so we can enjoy the rest of your birthday without worrying." Christy nodded. "Yes," she said. Then she grinned. "And an invitation to the King and Queen's Jubilee party, meeting Cherry, and a visit to Fairyland. I just knew this was going to be a wonderful birthday," she sighed happily. "And I was right." The end.